Hello everybody! For this 10-minute mini course, I will be talking to you about some facts and sustainability challenges in the agri-food sector. Most of you already know what sustainability is. You know it includes 3 pillars or dimensions: environmental, social and economic, and that we actually have to consider all 3 pillars if we want to achieve sustainability. And the same also goes for this sector, the agri-food sector. There are indeed specific sustainable development goals of the United Nations, goals and objectives that actually mention directly or indirectly this sector, which is one of the most important sectors, let's say from an economic point of view worldwide. As I said, let's have a look at a series of facts and related sustainability issues in this sector, just for you to get an idea of it. Of course, there are a lot more issues, a lot more challenges that the sector faces when it comes to sustainability, but this is just for you to get an idea. So, 95% of food production comes from the soil. This is how important agriculture can be for us. And agriculture actually covers 37% of the Earth's surface, and this is quite a high percentage indeed. You can think about the large amount of lands that are covered by glaciers, deserts, or just inhabited by us humans. Another thing that is important is the fact that when new cropland is made, this normally comes out by replacing forests, and this is, as you can imagine, quite disturbing. According to a study of 2007, and things maybe are slightly even worse today in the most recent studies, climate change has the potential of creating new and different climates than what we are used to live in and to have today. And we're talking about 40% of cultivated surfaces that will be subject to climate change in the future, and this is another fact that is quite disturbing. Another issue that I would like to bring to your attention is the issue of soil degradation. And here we have to talk about a reduction in the quality of the soil, as well as an increase in the soil erosion at the same time. And we're talking about 7.6 million tons of cereals that are lost due to soil degradation every year. And this number will rise in the future. And according to the most recent studies, it might reach 250 million tons by the year 2050. This is quite alarming as well, but it will be the equivalent to removing, let's say, 1.5 square kilometers of land from what we are producing now, from our production of food. So you can imagine that the numbers are quite alarming as well in this case. Another issue that I would like to show you is the water scarcity, but also the water quality. Here on the upper left corner, you see the Aral Sea, which was located between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And you can see how this lake has actually disappeared from the 1960s, and especially through the 1980s and 1990s to today. And the same on the bottom right corner, where you can see the Caspian Sea, which is the largest water body, the largest lake in the world. It is actually called a sea as well, because of its size and the quality of the water. And you can see that it changed from 2008 to today, both in terms of the level of the water, but also in terms of pollution. And these differences that we can see in these very disturbing images that I'm showing you are related mostly to intense agricultural activity. So the agricultural sector is once again quite responsible in this case, but also to climate change. Indeed, climate change is related also to other environmental issues. But this is always the case with the environmental issues that are somehow interrelated between them. The climate change in this case, is mostly related to the low inflows of rivers that come into these water bodies, for example the Volga River for the Caspian Sea, but also to high levels of evaporation which depend to the rise of temperatures in the world. So climate change and intensive agricultural activities also in this case. Agri-food accounts for 20 to 30% of total global emissions of greenhouse gas emissions. And we're talking about 80 to 85%, which depends on new crops and livestock. It is important to highlight that transports are also responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions. A percentage of those concern 11% of the total agri-food related greenhouse gas emissions. And that becomes extremely important if we consider, for example, the amount of fruits that arrive to us, to our plates, and they come from countries that are quite distant. So, the importance of transports, not only in terms of, for example, internal transports within the same facility, but also in terms of distribution of the final product as well, can play a very important role. I just showed you some of the environmental challenges, some of the environmental facts, but sustainability is not only related to the environment, but also to other dimensions. In this case, just to give you an idea, I show you a couple of examples of the social pillar issues related to the agri-food sector. So, child labor, for example, is an important social issue, and this is not only for developing countries, but it is also important for developed countries. And here the numbers show that at a worldwide level, 60% of all child laborers in the group of 5 to 17 years of age work in agriculture, and this is a quite important figure. It would be interesting to interpret. But another issue that I would like to show you is, for example, the accidents that are registered in the sector as well. This is in the case of Italy. We are talking about just from January to July 2024, and the number of accidents that were registered in this sector in Italy is 471. Showing an increase in such numbers, even though the legislation at the European level, but also, of course, at the national Italian level, has become more strict, more rigid. Nonetheless, these numbers actually are still increasing. This is, as I said, just for you to have an idea that we can have different types of issues and impacts, not just the environmental ones, but also social and economic, that I have not shown you here. Let's now move on to a more, let's say, concrete example. If we would like to assess the sustainability, the environmental or social of a product, for instance, in this case, we have a bottle of white wine. Could we just state, for example, that the agricultural phase is the most impacting in the life cycle of the bottle of white wine? Can we just say that in terms of its sustainability performance, of its environmental sustainability performance? Actually, we would have to know better which are the phases that are comprised in the life cycle of the product. For example, in this case, we would have the transports, as I mentioned before, for the agricultural sector. These are a significant contributor to, for example, the greenhouse gas emissions, etc. But then again, we have, for instance, refrigeration, where we would have energy consumption, which would be quite important for the case of white wine, as you can imagine. Then we would have packaging. For example, we would have the mere glass bottle that is used for the wine. Just to give you an idea, when performing an environmental sustainability assessment, what comes out is that the bottle of glass is actually the most impacting. So what we actually need to do is to have a holistic approach that can take into consideration the entire life cycle of a product or a service. And indeed, we have the life cycle thinking approaches that actually do that. They take into consideration the whole life cycle, starting from the raw materials extraction to processing and manufacturing of the product, to its distribution and its use or its consumption, and finally to the end of life treatment of the product. There are specific methodologies that are used in order to assess the three pillars of sustainability of a product or a service. For example, we have life cycle assessment to assess the environmental. We have social life cycle assessment to assess the social pillar, and we have life cycle costing to assess the economic pillar. And these are methodologies that work at the product level. Of course, there are also methodologies that go to the same direction, but on organization level. So we have OLCA, organizational LCA. We have SOLCA, social organizational LCA, and also there have been some suggestions for organization life cycle costing. There is a specific framework to use, which is underpinned by ISO standards, more specifically 14040 and 14044 of 2006. These actually explain step by step what to do and how to apply these methodologies. And actually, to this day, we have also a great number of scientists working on an aggregation of the results of these three methodologies, of the three pillars of sustainability into one. Let's say aggregated results, which would form a life cycle sustainability assessment. Of course, there are also other methodologies of life cycle thinking, for example, that focus on a specific impact category. For example, we would have carbon footprint, and there are simplified versions of these methodologies as well, and specific tools to use. That will be all. Thank you very much for your attention. You can use this email address should you have any questions.